Good morning, everyone. Welcome. This is the living room, a now bi-monthly session for conversation and information sharing on topics related to sustainable jewelry practices. As you know, we cover a variety of topics from practical tools that can be implemented in your jewelry practice to some in-depth learning about artisanal mining, for example. Today, we're going to be discussing some responsible sourcing initiatives that have been evolving to center the experiences of artisanal diamond miners and mining affected communities while working to increase the local benefit from this industry. As usual, we'll have a blog post, summary, and recording of this session on our website. I'm Cecilia Echeverry, consultant and director of operations and outreach at Christina T. Miller Sustainable Jewelry Consulting, and I'm very happy to be here with you all, along with my teammate, Ana Brazaitite, consultant and education director. Christina is away today, enjoying time with her kiddo on a school trip. So Ana and I are hoping to make her justice being you with here today. Through our educational and consulting services, we provide strategy, guidance, and education on responsible sourcing and sustainability for the jewelry industry. You can find out more at christinamiller.com, and you can always reach out to us with questions and suggestions for these sessions. I want to say a big thank you to those of you who've been able to contribute to making these sessions happen through the pay what you want option on our website. We really appreciate it, as well as to all of you here for showing up for this conversation and listening to it down the road. Super quick housekeeping. This conversation, as you know, is being recorded and will be in the public realm. We encourage your participation through the chat and may read some questions or comments out loud. For the best sound quality for the recording, please make sure your microphone is on mute. And remember that this is a kind community space, so please be respectful of everyone's privacy and personal space if you're using the chat. FYI, save the date. Our next living room is on May 17th. Please sign up for a newsletter to receive a reminder about that, as well as to be on top of the takeaways that we will publish. You can follow the link here in the chat that I'm putting. And now I'll hand it over to Ana to start us the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Cecilia. So we're here today to talk about systemic change and a more sustainable future for diamond mining and impacted communities in Sierra Leone. We'll touch on the history and context of why this work is significant, and then dive right into a more forward-looking conversation. Looking back, the sobering history of the illegal trade of diamonds that developed after their discovery in the late 1930s was the beginning of a more recent role that diamonds played in political power dealings and in fueling the brutal civil war of the 1990s. Healing from a colonialist history is a challenge, especially when the impacts are still so persistent. Today, we're focusing on a vision for the future, how diamonds might still have the potential to be a part of the healing story. And after the session, we'll share some more additional resources in our takeaways for anyone who'd like to delve deeper into the history. There is a lot of past harm to make up for in Sierra Leone, and at the same time, to move beyond doing no harm, we want to work toward creating a system that is truly beneficial to everyone in mining communities, as well as one that helps those benefits ripple out to the wider communities as well. This still isn't happening at the moment. In a 2019 report by anti-corruption nonprofit Transparency International, it was concluded that hundreds of millions of dollars generated by the extraction of diamonds continue to leave the country without benefiting anyone in the community. At CMC, we are committed to supporting the transformation of the ways that communities benefit from their mineral resources. And we're really pleased to have this conversation centered around methods of working towards sustainable development in Sierra Leone with our guests today, Fas Lebbie and Jared Holstein. Fas is a designer working at the intersection of design, technology, academia, development, and entrepreneurship. Originally from Sierra Leone, Fas will share today about his social enterprise initiative called Root Studios. It's an open, collaborative makerspace that teaches job-ready programs to youths, women, and people with disabilities in mining communities. The initiative also has a sister company, Root Diamonds, which is market-facing and adds value to diamonds by attaching them to a miner's story. They are also establishing a gem cutting center, and the sales of these diamonds will provide funds for the sustenance of Root Studios. And our second guest, Jared Holstein, is the owner of Amadeo, a San Francisco-based diamond, colored stone, and estate jewelry wholesale business focused on known source diamonds and colored gemstones, post-consumer gems, and historical cuts. Jared also serves on the advisory board for ethical metalsmiths as co-chair of the Responsible Sourcing Committee and as a member of the Jewelry Glossary Project. So we're so glad to have you both here with us today, and we'll dive right into getting to know both of you and your work a little bit. Let's start with Fas. Some people in the audience here may have heard your presentation at the Chicago Responsible Jewelry Conference in 2022, which was where we met also. But for those not familiar yet with Root Diamonds and Root Studio, can you give us a brief overview of your work thus far? And for those of us who have been following your work a little bit, are there, a couple updates that you'd like to share as well?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. You kind of gave an eloquent description of Wood Studios and Wood Diamonds, but I can add the missing pieces on that. So Wood Studios really kind of is built has a foundation of design in my background design. It's basically a design incubator that focuses on using the agency of young people through human capital development. We teach digital skills and artisanal skills and connect the graduates to the global digital economy. So it's really based, the foundation of that is by 2050, the data says that 1 in every 4 people in the world will be African. And Wood Studios really begins to plant the seeds of the future to lay the foundation in that by building local capacities and helping exacerbate the skills revolution for job-ready programs. And the idea is what we do at the studio is we teach diamond cutting, and grading, jewelry design, mineral design, and product and UX UI design, and impact entrepreneurship. So that's the studio and that's the center. Now we zoom into Wood Diamonds. So Wood Diamonds is simply a market strategy to fund Wood Studios. We leverage the revenue from the diamond company and 100% support the studios. And the diamond company is based on this idea of material light, experience heavy. So what I mean by that is the material light is in fact the mineral. When we look at mineral from the conditions of a diamond, someone takes a diamond and you look at the stories that are built around it at the extraction site. There's stories of oppression, stories of entrepreneurship, survival, and trying to make do of the best situation. And there's many conditions that exacerbate that. But then you take the diamond and you follow its choreography from the extraction site all the way to centers here like the Western, and you see the same diamond has different stories. It's a story of love. It's a story whether it's an engagement. So you can see that choreography from one end to another. And I think what Wood Diamond is really doing is really working with the small scale miners to tell stories, to trace it through the stories of the diamond and really begin to build that narrative arc. And I think one of the things that the industry has in some cases done is edit out some of the stories, and we don't have access to those, and that can be incredibly superficial and harm. And I think what Wood Diamond is doing at its heart is really focusing on that and telling the stories of the consumers, stories of the miners and connecting them. And I think part of the research too we've done is that consumers are looking for somewhat storied diamonds. They're also looking for traceability and transparent diamonds that, more importantly, that enlist them in direct connection and direct interaction with the miner. So there is an activism about that where they want to go back and they want to have a continuity in the feedback loop. And that's what Wood Diamond is trying to do.
Yeah, I definitely agree that that people are looking for this specific connection and knowing a bit more about where their materials are coming from. And the way that you're tying that into Root Studios is something that I think is really fascinating. As someone coming from outside of the jewelry industry, you have this unique perspective into kind of using diamonds as more of a value addition and increasing the benefits in the community in a really well-rounded way, and kind of going beyond this like finite resource and thinking ahead. So maybe you could tell us a little bit more about that aspect of the work.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in terms of how we have looked at Wood Studios at the center, I think it stems from, again, a design background of sustainability. And again, sometimes I refrain from the word sustainability because of its challenges and its problems within it. But we are looking at, one, how do we build how do we try how do we build sustainable conditions to at a local scale to protect but also empower community, especially miners. But how do we build sustainable models within the context of looking at it at multiple levels of scale? One of the things that's important to understand is that the industry, or in some ways ASM space, has, just like a diamond with many facets, it's important for people to understand the problem has many facets and they're mutating and changing. And with that context, I feel like we need to understand that first part of what we are trying to do, sustainability, as to understand the problem as what does the problem look like at the micro level? The diamond on the ground, how do we understand the conditions of the challenges and the opportunities for that? Then we move at another level of scale, the miner, which is the individual scale. And then we begin to think about, okay, now, how does that affect the environment as a level of scale? What are the opportunities and what are the problems? And then we move mostly to the community, and then regional, and eventually planet. And the planet level is where we start talking to the consumers in a more Western context. I think what we are trying to do is to understand those levels of scale and build niche structures that begin to fight back or counterpower structures on that. And then the second part for us is then, if there is some level of sustainability that centers the needs of the people, how do we transition out of mining? How do we transition to alternative livelihoods? Because most of the miners I have met, no one at 4, 5 years old, when you say, what do you want to do? No one imagined I want to be a miner in the sun. And this was not the realities of their experiences of the future. What forces them there is the economic conditions, socio-political conditions in the country that forces them to go there. Later on, I will give some context on that in terms of the history of Sierra Leone. But so in that context, we want to build alternative livelihoods that transition miners out. I remember when I was having a conversation with one of my mentor, Christina. One of the things she pointed out, which I thought was very crucial, is that transition also needs to be centered on agency. And I think that's crucial to understand that also. And but that's what we basically do for Woods is we build a foundation of sustainable and looking at the levels of scale. And then we also open the potential for transition towards sustainable to alternative livelihoods for those who want to opt out of mining, because most time people are going on those. And in my interview and research so far, a lot of time, I would say most people are looking for venture capital, money to start a business. They're hoping to find a diamond that they can then connect to something away from it. So there's a story there to tell us what's happening and why people are doing this. So those are some of the facets of how we're thinking about the problem and in what ways we're going about trying to solve it in many sense.
I love, Faz, how you broke down the initiative that you're trying to do with the community in these sort of layers that you were explaining, starting with a diamond, then with a miner, then with a community, and then you zoom out into the world, because I think that's also useful for all of us to understand how we can start being and doing responsible sourcing, because as you also said, it can be super overwhelming. There's so many facets, so many different sort of areas that we need to figure out, and we can't do it all. So what you just said is, I think, very applicable to all of us. So we start small, we start with our material thing, which is the gem or the metal, and then we start to sort of branch out. So what's next? What's next? The human beings behind it, then the community that envelops them, and then you just keep sort of zooming out. I thought that was important, and it illustrates what we can do as well. And then what you were saying about, you know, what's sort of the exit strategy? What is after mining? What's after the gems? What's after the pit has sort of run out? So what's sustainable? What's in the long term? And also at some point, what do they want to do? So if we can transition that like a little wedge so that thing can keep moving, I think that's also pretty important. I'm not sure if Anna, you have anything else to add, or somebody has a question, feel free.
Yeah, one thing
Yeah.
to add on that is that it's also important that that transition to alternative livelihood is not just a story. There are empirical evidences of resource exhaustibility in many parts of Africa. Even Sierra Leone, they started seeing that in the late 1970s, there were evidences of that. So there's an imperative to do that as a part on a, not just on the industry level, but on a governance level. And we can get to that later. Let me leave it for questions or thoughts.
Yeah. Those are all great points. You know, thank you, Fas, for sharing, and Cecilia for highlighting some of those. I think we mentioned Jared is a part of Jewelry Glossary Project, as well as I am. And one of the things that we note in our definition of sustainability is that mining is specifically environmentally unsustainable. But when you consider the full picture of sustainability, that includes cultural and economic sustainability as well. And so one thing can be a tool to catalyze development in another area. So we'll get a little deeper into all of that work that Fas is working on in a little bit, maybe hear some more of the challenges. But let's also introduce Jared at this time. If you want to come on and tell us a bit about your business. And for you, I know that your sourcing decisions for the gemstones that you sell are very driven by your values as well. So tell us a bit about that.
Well, actually, I'm fine just listening to Fas this whole session. Yeah, I mean, for me, it's really hard, excuse me. For me, it's really hard to separate the materials themselves with the story and the journey of those materials and the realities associated with those materials, because almost everything we touch, or most of the things we touch, almost everything we eat and most of our jewelry materials were touched by other people's hands, usually and often across the world. And, if we start with the premise that all lives have equal value and everyone has the same right to happiness and well-being and the right to prosper, then you can't consider the material separate from the journey that material had. So, for me, it's like the hand and the heart. Like I love rocks. I love shiny things. I have a passion for gems and geology. And so that's the magpie in me. And then the other part is always saying, yes, and, what about the realities associated with these materials? So I'm keenly interested in the impacts. Everything we do and have has impacts, both positive and negative. Few things have only one or the other. So for me, I don't use the word ethical to describe any of the materials or gemstones that I sell to customers. But what I try to do is gather as much data and as much information about who mined these gems, where they came from, or from what period they were, and just share as much specific information with people as I can, and then allow them to make value judgments or decide what best aligns with either their own, ethical or moral compass, or with that of their customers, or with whatever their customer is looking for.
Yeah, that's a great point. In all of this work, words like sustainable and ethical don't really apply to the material itself. It's more about the practices of, the person selling it or the person working with it. I think that's a good point. So speaking of the material specifically, you have been able to, at the Tucson Gem Shows, kind of debut a soft launch of some artisanally mined diamonds from Sierra Leone. So if you want to tell us a little bit about that, why it was important to you to bring this product to your clients, and what kinds of assurances or information that you were able to get about this material that made you feel comfortable and made you feel that it was aligned with your business values.
Sure. I think with me, I'll start with the why, which I think is always an important question. So the diamonds that I sell, other than these artisanally mined diamonds, are all either antique or post-consumer, which obviously have a limited environmental footprint, but also create no benefit to anyone, or certainly to producing communities, right? So I had been waiting for, ever since I entered the industry, see how much gray I have here in the camera, almost a couple decades ago. I had been waiting for an opportunity to be able to purchase more directly from, and even purchase artisanal diamonds, which make up something like 20% of annual production. That just enters the flow. It enters the gyre of diamond production, and it's rarely outside of a rough trading center like Dubai or Antwerp, where even then it's a claim as to where it's from. It just kind of enters the gyre, and it's never been available separately. So I had been tracking every diamond or artisanally mined diamond mine to market program that I had heard of for a very long time. And none of the larger projects ever really bore fruit. I want to note that, as Christina noted, Fas did bring diamonds to Chicago 2 years ago, and I have a couple of them, and I love them. But when you think about, or also when you think about these projects as interventions, obviously interventions at scale, like the larger it can be, ideally, the larger the impact it can have. So I had been waiting for this opportunity for quite a long time, and I was fortunate to be able to purchase these material from Gem Fair, who had been, I think, started in 2017, this is an initiative of Beers, and they started in 2017, kind of building out capacity. And certainly there was already work in Sierra Leone that had been done. I'm sure people who are here in the industry will remember a Diamond Development Initiative, which created the Mendeleo Diamond Standards, which is now a part of Resolve. But in any case, when you said the word assurance, that's actually, I think, what it used to be, the GemFair standard, and now it's the GemFair Artisanal and Small Scale Assurance Program. And from a program perspective, like how we do things the right way, the program is based in like the 5-step framework of the OECD due diligence guidance. It's consistent with the Mendeleo standards, craft code, et cetera. It's pretty rigorous. It's really rigorous, not just pretty rigorous, which was something I was happy to see. I was also happy to see that they use a third party company, SGS certificate. SGS, it's not SGS Systems. SGS, who is like SCS, is an auditing body to look over the program with on-site audits again. So the rigor is there, like as an intervention on the ground. And then separately, what happens on the ground in terms of minor training, provision of PPE, financing. Like now they're doing forward financing, so allowing people access to capital, and then following that, they're like paying salaries for farmers and people doing reclamation work again. So kind of like all the things that we look for in a well-run program were there. So I was excited, and then I guess I don't know if I want to stop talking, so I'll stop talking, but we can get more into the kind of the granularity traceability component, which is also all of this is really, really hard stuff, and the traceability component is really granular and pretty interesting, and maybe we can talk about that later.
Jared, Brandy has a question for you. How did you get involved in GemFair? And do you feel there's an opportunity to scale? Monica was also mentioning scaling as a topic.
Well, I'm involved as a customer. I am a customer. I purchased these goods, right? I guess this is also a separate, or an important part of kind of, I think, any of these conversations is products need to be, we live in a capitalist world, right? And these projects need to be financially viable, When these projects are financially viable and we can talk about changing the paradigm and changing the systems and changing how we do things. But right now, things need to work financially, right, to make sense. So I appreciate their approach, which was to say, it was like, to bring these to market, they have to sell for market prices. The whole idea of $10,000 an ounce gold. I shouldn't use industry shorthand, but like when there are projects, that are funded by government or something, and the net result, not the inevitable result. When the result is $10,000 an ounce gold, so gold that actually costs $10,000 an ounce to produce or to purchase, when the spot price for gold is $2,100, probably doesn't have a long horizon, right? And ultimately that doesn't end up helping producer communities either. So I'm sorry, did that answer the question? I don't remember.
It was mostly about how you got involved with the GemFair goods,
Yeah.
And the opportunity scale. So I think you did cover that. Yeah.
Is there the opportunity to scale? I mean, gosh, I hope so, right? There's something like 1.5 million people involved with mining artisanal diamonds all over the world, mostly in Africa countries, but also in Indonesia and Brazil and elsewhere. And wouldn't it be great if there were more direct routes to market for these goods. And if we could help people mine more safely, efficiently, effectively, and lessen the negative impacts. So like that's like one of the things that the Gem Fair program is doing is a lot of it is you're meeting people where they are, and you're also meeting projects where they are. You know, a pit might have been done long ago, but like where there is virgin ground, if you can teach people to terrace properly and remove the topsoil and cover this topsoil so it's not eroded away when you mine the project, like reclamation is much easier. So when you do things, when you can upskill miners, it's not necessarily about extracting resources more efficiently, but it's also about, again, thinking on the long tail, about the impacts of mining. And of course, in Sierra Leone, I just want to note, because people listening might not know, but there is both large scale and small scale mining happening, often within hundreds of feet of each other. And so they have different impacts, but certainly one of the takeaways that I was most humbled by from one of the surveys done with the Kimberley Process Civil Society Coalition by Christina T. Miller Consulting, was that one of the largest concerns of communities impacted by diamond mining were environmental concerns, right? An impact on quality of life. So that's dust, it's impacts and pollution of the watershed, and like their ability to live and prosper and live their lives as they see fit, which might mean being subsistence farmers. If that's what they want to do, they have the right to do that without being impacted, right?
Right.
So, so things like helping people mine efficiently and in a way that doesn't impact their surrounding community, that doesn't create, pits where water can stand and malaria-carrying mosquitoes can breed, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
One thing, as Jared, as you're saying that, the question also got me thinking a lot with the industry, and in some ways not with I think the question that was asked was the right time maybe to point with this obsession that we have on scale. And that means sometimes thinking in scaling comes challenges that the logics of capitalism and logics of capital that really come in friction to the well-being of locality. And I think sometimes we should descale and create local independent structures that are small. And I think as we begin to change those worldviews, I think we begin to see a little bit. That's why the problem is so complex, is it's intertwined with logics of capital and capitalism. And it becomes very, very difficult.
100%. Thank you for pointing that out. And I think the whole idea of degrowth is fascinating, like from an economic from an economic perspective. And I think you're absolutely right. I think we also have to center, like, what is scale? What do the people want? Are we asking people in producer communities what they want? Is what they want scale? And anyway, you're right. I love that the friction here is super interesting and incredibly important to explore. So I guess when the question is about scale, I think it's also about, are there good things? Are there good learnings that we can take away from a program that's functioning well, that can be applied elsewhere, that can help people answer questions, or can help people, like environmental best practices? If they want to mine, can we help them mine? What are the lessons learned? We can help them mine in a more environmentally responsible way that doesn't impact the surrounding land, or that allows them to more easily reclaim their own farmland. But yes,
yeah, I think
let's get all the diamonds out of the ground and into the market, for sure.
right.
I'd like to comment. Could I comment? Yeah, I would like to comment on a couple of things that both Jared and Fas have said that I think are really important to the discussion, especially about scale. I mean, Jared said, you know, we live in a world capitalist system. That's how it works. The scale in Sierra Leone has been huge and diminishing in terms of mining, diminishing over time. The question isn't so much about scale, it's about place within the scale. So there is a mine to market for Sierra Leone diamonds that's always existed. The problem in Sierra Leone is their only component of that whole system is to sell raw materials. And so those raw materials then get transshipped elsewhere. They get value added in many different ways. They get cut, they get turned into jewelry, they get sold on a global scale. And it's been going on for almost 100 years. So the question isn't so much, the question is, how does Sierra Leone get involved in that upstream? Because that's where their economy develops. Their mines will deplete. Though paying miners more money, which seems to be the focus of almost everybody, is to take care of the artisanal miners better, doesn't seem to be a solution. Because the market price determines what they get ultimately. The solution is, what else can they get locally? Can they cut diamonds? Can they make jewelry? Can they be technologically and effectively connected to the global market themselves? Sell from Sierra Leone to Kansas City, to a retail jeweler. How are they become involved? How is that not taken away from them for them never to have? That's the question. It's a pretty simple question. You don't have to reinvent what happens. You have to reinvent how it happens. Mm-hmm. And who benefits.
Yeah. Thanks for that comment, Martin. For context, for anyone who is not familiar, Martin DeWitt works closely with Fas. They are, and Mickey, who's here as well. The three of them are make up Root Studios as a project. So I really appreciate this kind of back and forth conversation. I think that Jared's point about, what the communities themselves want is an important one. And when we think about scale, it's also important to think about, like, what can the earth sustain? And that is often very much in competition with wanting to scale up. I'm just going to mute that. Okay. Because, so far things have been scaling at a pace that the earth cannot sustain. So we have to think about benefiting people, but in a way that is more overall sustainable. And I think talking about these realities on the ground is a nice way to lead into another question we had for really the both of you. We'll start with Fas. You have this development vision, but at the same time, you're kind of having to, in the moment, work within the diamond market as it functions now. So what are some of the challenges of kind of having to work within the way things are at the moment while also creating this new vision for the future?
Yeah. So speaking on the development of vision, I think the foundational piece obviously is my background as a designer, and one of the key understanding that was life-changing for me is that the entire built world around us, everything we see, the ideologies, the philosophies, is a product of design. And that means it can be undesigned. And I think it's been empowering and emancipatory to understand that. So as I have understood that, that means that most of the challenges I see, I'm able to trace to the lineage of them and why they are. And then there is a power in that to understand that they have been reproduced. They are worldviews, ideas that are reproduced by design. When you go to Sierra Leone, when you go to different, you begin to see that. And those in turn, those worldviews are then connected to the challenges that we face, and how people see things. So I have, in terms of talking about those problems or challenges, I think it's important to understand that the African narrative, these challenges, whether economic, whether industry or consumer, no matter how much we do, will come little without the active, intentional act from the African economy, from the African governments, to intentionally take actions to actualize their own version of regional development. That is at the center for any outside externalities, because I consider us, even I am part of Sierra Leone, but I have been educated in a Western context. I have to check my own realities of hegemonic and Eurocentric designs that I carry, and I have to be aware of that. So if the governments, the localities and the government play a role in taking actions to actualize their own versions, I think it goes a long way in creating pressures or multidimensional pressures for us, external parties, whether the consumers, whether the industry, to fall in line, to make sure if they want access to these resources, there are certain things that are in place and they're enforced, and corruption is reduced, regulation is reduced. So those things help a lot. In that context, I think that's the center of it. But as I think about, if we zoom in from the African narrative and the role the African governments play in creating those pressures and helping with those challenges, I think we have to think about industry. That means changing mindsets. That means, how do we relegate ideologies of capital and worldviews that focus on bottom line at all costs? And then how do we dance between this idea of legal and ethical, right? So people check the boxes of legal. And then how do we build that in terms of industries understanding that? But I also think what's important is industry level needs to be self-aware of the rights of the locals, and how those people imagine their own version of diamond success. And then industry needs to take actionable steps to embed those rights of the locals into their business model that can be portrayed or in some ways executed in a way that realizes the sensibilities, the cultural sensibilities, the economic sensibilities and realities of the people. I think that becomes a really, and obviously industry. I remember the first time I went with the JCK show with Martin. It was the first time I saw something and then I came back and I was like, this entire system works on asymmetric level of information. So it feeds it, it needs it. And so how does the industry get out of that asymmetric level of information if the organism needs it to survive? And that's the friction we have in the space. And so I think on the industry level, those are some ideas to think about. On consumer level, it's more about thinking about knowing the story, becoming a consumer activism, but also understanding the collective power of consumers that you may have to challenge those systems and finding ways to continue to communicate that a lot. And I think that goes a long way in the industry and some of the challenges. In just kind of closing, contextualizing all of this, I think for me, I have to talk within the context of Africa, because ASM challenges, it's global, but we have a significant amount in the African landscape. I think we need to think about how we get involved with local initiatives, and the initiatives we put and we involve in, make sure they're run by locals. Because I think there is an indirect benefit with the African Free Trade Agreement that we can actually directly or indirectly impact, such as we can do like helping local miners, lobbying for better conditions like legalization, capacity building. All of those things actually become indirectly fulfill the promises of African Free Trade Agreement, which I think it's crucial. It may feel out of place, but it is connected if we contextualize the problem of ASM. So again, there's a multitude, a facet of problem space in the ASM, but those are some of my quick thoughts on it.
I think what you're saying, Faz, about the worldview and how we look at all this setup of development that we've been having for decades, we do have to understand that it's been through the glasses of the Western world, of course. And you reminded me of a little sort of study that I'm doing, comparing RJC and B Corp. And at some point I put a note for the team, and I was just saying, like, this is also Anglo-Saxon, like all these things that they want from us. But it's just like you just said, it's just a worldview, it's a lens. And we have to make that lens bigger and certainly brighter. And I wanted to ask, I'm not sure if we have time, Anna, to Faz, like, what are the people on the ground telling you, so that we can get a little glimmer of their worldview, that stuff that maybe we just don't know, or surprising, different.
Yeah, I think one of the things that for me is this idea of sense of entrapment. I think they are, and when I mean entrapment, I mean the inability for minors to improve their current conditions, regardless of self-determination or will. So that part is crucial. So in terms of that, and there's been like a slow cancellation of their futures through, in some ways, fractual systems of exploitation. And when I mean fractual, there is the colonial hierarchy and power exploitation, but there is also the African to African exploitation, the people in power or in people who have leadership positions. It's important to understand that the story of exploitation has multiple facets of that that's happening on the ground. So there's a sense of frustration on that. And there is a turn to entrepreneurship to many sense to get out of it. And the frustration with the government. If you look at early 1930s, mid 1935s, when mining started, there was more of a large scale. Alluvial mining, ASM, the histories are traced back to this proportion or disagreement with government, because beneficiation was having issue. When diamond was found, the locals in Kona were not getting enough. So they decided to take matters into their own hands and find it. Those are the roots of it. So you can see there's a story with alluvial mining, ASM, to this idea of beneficiation. And it became taking it into your hands is the only way you see benefits, because even what corporations are giving does not make its way down to the people. So that's the roots of ASM, why people go out to do it. And that started early 1935, 5 years after diamond was founded. So there is the dissatisfaction. So there's this motivation for people to bypass industry, giants, and government, sad to say, to go straight to consumers. And there's obviously cause for hope. I see like counterpower acts of design, people who are coming together, counterpower local initiatives, that there's many of them now. And so they recently won a case with Octa mining, but those are some of the grounded frustrations, entrapment, looking for other ways, and there's counterpower movements that have been forming. So that's very hopeful in terms of what's on the ground.
Thank you. And I also just want to make a note that that same feeling is felt in Latin America. It's not only like a global thing, but also the powers that be in country that sometimes don't help. Great, Anna.
Yeah, I think, sorry, sometimes it's so hard to like be taking in such amazing information and think of like, oh, we still have to have these questions that we had prepared. But I think that Anna in the chat also commented in a way that kind of connects this whole thing back to our work as jewelers and how we talk to our clients, and like this idea of how do we tell this story of it's important to support artisanal miners so that they can pursue their dreams, and really highlight that part of it, that it's not just about supporting artisanal mining as it is now, but that it can be a part of building something bigger in the future. And so maybe Jared, if you want to hop back in and kind of tell us your ideas on that at all, and how the goods were received at the show, anything that kind of connects these dots of us as jewelers and how we convey some of this really complex story to the end consumer as well.
That's why I'm a wholesaler. Right?
Fair.
Share the realities. I try to create a shared I mean, that's fundamentally what is necessary, right? Is a shared understanding. Why we work on the Jared Jewelry Glossary Project. We need to have a shared understanding of what all these terms mean, and we can approach these truths as best we can with a shared understanding of what all that means. That's honestly why I don't envy the position of jewelers who have to, you know, the truth is, look, this is the jewelry industry. We inherited. We didn't create it. And the realities associated with many of the materials we use are not wonderful. Some of them are, and, you know, hopefully more of them will be. Imagine if we get to the point where every piece of jewelry that you pick up, you say, and this gold came from this fair mine, you know, this fair mine licensee, and these are the community projects that the percentage that is given to that community is supporting. This diamond is from this. This diamond was mined by this person, and this is what you know, where everything had a great story, and not just a great story, but a great reality, right? Because I feel like we've been so much of it is kind of a narrative-based truth rather than a truth-based narrative that's used to sell jewelry. So, and I just wanted to get back to, I mean, I think I am so grateful that Fas is imagining the future beyond, diamonds, because they are, of course, finite, right? That is, you know, that all of that needs to be done now. And in addition to giving people agency, if they don't want to mine, and why, you know, as he noted, like no one fantasizes about growing up and spending all day in the sun doing backbreaking labor. So, but I think it's always like a yes and. First of all, we don't also like, it's like people try many different things. Things don't necessarily work, but it's always like the yes and. We need to be planning for the future, planning for a post-diamond future in Sierra Leone in a real way. And I think we also have a duty, have an obligation to support people in not just in Sierra Leone, but everywhere where we are extracting benefit, where we personally, as members of this industry, are extracting benefit, to make sure that we are not just that benefit must be divided more equally, and we must be working to reduce harm, right? Less harm, more benefit everywhere.
Yeah, I think it's when you're in front of a customer, it's difficult to balance telling them the story behind the stones without over romanticizing that story and keeping it real, and trying to also make a sale. That's always a bit of a challenge. And we are 5 minutes away, Anna.
Yeah. So I think we've had some really great conversation and discussion in the chat. We'll try to share anything in the blog that we don't get to right now. And since we just have a few minutes left, we'll wrap up with the last question, I think. I'll also note that Christina Villegas mentioned in the chat that some people do love mining, And she says, I remember one miner telling me it's his way of connecting with the beauty of the earth. However, he was working in a cool environment, not in the sun. So it goes back to the agency conversation, right? Like people doing what they love. And Russell's question was the last one I had seen come in, so I'll read that out loud. What kind of risks do people and communities face when they decide to act in a way that supports self-determination in the face of governments and corporations? Are the risks worth the rewards when ultimately ASM is unsustainable?
So it's a good question. What kind of risk do people community face when they decide to act in a way that supports self-determination in the face of government and corporation? I think for me, within my own experiences, one of the things I have tried to do is build this idea of being an embedded ally in the system. And once I have, as continuing to become an embedded ally in the system, I think a lot of the risks that individuals have on the ground is I think there's an opportunity for the jewelry industry consumers to create a direct interaction with the ASM, because that is an opportunity to avert some risks. Because right now there's distrust in corporation, there's distrust in governments. So what does that mean? It opens up the space for jurors to intentionally act of direct commerce with ASM. And I think more opportunities are there for that. In terms of those risks, I think the risks are evident in terms of the motivations to bypass it. And that means sometimes people have to worry about their own safety. Sometimes I have few people who are doing a Class C lawsuit against a corporation in a mining company in Connor, and they have to worry about their own safety. They have to worry about their local leaders who are in conversations with these mining companies. But I actually think in zooming into the question, I think in the sake of this conversation, I think this actually opens up opportunity space or how the jewelry industry can become an alternative to those risks, or as an opportunity in what ways the jewelry industries can mitigate or offer opportunities for people who are distrusted and disgruntled, and that can be an ongoing conversation. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's yeah. Christina again is in the chat noting that increasingly governments are also becoming more friendly to ASM, especially officials who are based in mining regions. So it seems like things are moving and shifting a bit. Any other comments y'all would like to leave us with to wrap up? I feel like we're yeah, like I feel like we could be here a lot longer. It's been so great so far, but
I'll let Jared go, and then if you have any, but yeah, I can.
Please go ahead.
Oh, for me, I think what we are trying to do really is just build a consensus, work with locals, center the needs and rights of locals. And I think as we continue to think about that, and also the industry need to find ways to become embedded allies that centers the imaginaries of the people. That means what they want for themselves, and understand our idea that we come from privileged zones and we are privileged bodies, and there is a lot of sacrificed bodies and zones on the ground, and our orientation with the logic of capital really skews our worldviews. So I think as the industry continue to be more in line with that, that has positive ramifications without intentionally trying to design everything. But those are some of my thoughts in terms of how we think about the industry moving forward.
Excellent. Jared?
I mean, how can I follow that? You know, I went just a bit ago, Fas, when you were talking about, you know, a more direct connection between people in ASM and the public. I mean, I just was reminded that really, like, if I'm doing my job right, I feel like I will put myself out of a job. And that's like, that would make me happier than anything else in the world. Right.
I think you said it. We need to get ourselves off of this job to bring people up. That's
I'd be
beautiful.
happy
Thank
to.
you. This has been
Thank you.
wonderful. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
thank you both so much for being here and everyone for such a lively chat conversation. We'll follow up as usual. So take care, everyone.
Have a great weekend.